Hello, church. Bob Myers today as we share from Psalm 77. And this psalm is attributed to Asaph, again, as yesterday's psalm was, who was a worship leader in Israel. And this is it's a beautiful psalm, as all the psalms are. And there's some different ways we could look at this psalm. I looked at a couple of commentaries. One called this psalm the pressure of problems. And definitely that is evident in the psalm, but if you call the psalm that, then you lose track of the glory of the last half of the psalm. Granted, there's some problems here. He speaks of being overwhelmed, and his heart's crying out. And then another one called it strengthening a weakening faith, and I think that's probably descriptive. Asaph speaks of being weak and crying out, and why doesn't the Lord answer? And another one said the consoling memory of God's redemptive work. And Asaph is discouraged, and as he says, overwhelmed. In verse, my spirit was overwhelmed. In verse 3, he said, I remembered God, I was troubled, I complained, and my spirit was overwhelmed. He's overwhelmed with his problems. But he does remember, as he goes through the psalm, he does remember God's gracious work and God's redemptive work. Someone wrote about this psalm, the message of this psalm is that to brood on sorrow is to be broken and disheartened, while to see God is to sing on the darkest day. And if we look out at the world, or if you'd happen to turn on the news and watch the news, which I don't recommend, it's discouraging. But if we think on God, we can be encouraged, can't we? We know that God's in control and he's going to take care of things, and he has us in his hand. And so that's what this psalm does. He starts out crying out to the Lord, and he says, I'm overwhelmed. And then he says, he asks questions. Will the Lord cast off forever? Will he be favorable no more? Is it over? Is it over? Is God always going to be this way? No. God is going to move. And God is moving, though you may not see him at the moment. God is moving. And then he says, in 11, I will remember the works of the Lord. Surely I will remember thy wonders of old. And then he begins to recount some of what God has done. And one of the things he goes back to is, as Bob Billingsley mentioned a week ago, one of the most quoted and most referenced miracles of the Bible was the crossing of the Red Sea. And he remembers and how God saved the people of Israel when it was a very dark night. Literally, the Egyptian army was pressing in behind them. The sea was before them. They had nowhere to go, and God miraculously delivered them. And read through that in Psalm 77, 16, 17, 18, and 19. You know the beauty of it. And if you see the majesty, the water saw thee, O God. The waters saw thee. They were afraid. The depths also were troubled. The clouds poured out water. The sky sent out a sound, thunder. Thine arrows also went abroad. The voice of thy thunder was in the heaven. The lightnings lighted, and the world trembled and shook. What an awesome display of God's power and glory. And then look in 20. Thou leddest thy people like a flock by the hand of Moses and Aaron. That great power displayed in the universe, but yet toward his people, he shepherds them like a flock, like a shepherd would shepherd his sheep. The tenderness of the Lord. And he remembers, and he's inspired and encouraged in the midst of trouble. Today, there's lots of troubles around us. Today, Planned Parenthood is planning to open a clinic. I pray that we pray against that, and that maybe we can go forth and go and stand there and make a public statement, a public prayer. God, we stand against this wickedness. God is going to answer. He is answering. We may not see it right now, but he's answering. And he's leading us as a shepherd leads his flock. Be blessed today. Psalm 77.